Hey, it's Crumbs. You're lost? How do you not know where you are? It's Thorin's channel.
Okay, I'm here for another episode of Reflections, and for this one, my guest is Jensen, formerly known as Incarnation. And if people want to know more about like the earlier portion of your career, the portion when you had the Riot ban, and then when you first came into Cloud9, we've actually already done that for them. We did a written interview many moons ago, back when I was at On Gamers. And that's like, that can be found. It's talking about like what would happen if you got unbanned, like how things were. That was back in season 4 actually. And as usual, I get you to compare like Bjergsen and Froggen and do the whole Danish Mid laner thing. Then what's interesting is this is actually where one of the reasons why one thing I like about interviews is it's when you do an interview that totally changes what answers someone will give you. And the video interview we did was something like, I think it was like the second or the first week of your ever being on Cloud9 in terms of the LCS. It's when I came there and it was season 5, it must be season 5 summer. And it was where you just played the first, I think, 2 weeks. And over the first 2 weeks, even though you'd won that first game over TSM in like what was probably one of the most, I mean, no one could be proud of that win. It was like 70-minute game or something terrible. And I think you're on Cogmore, something absolute garbage. But the problem is, right after that, obviously everything went to shit. You know, you joined Cloud9. It's looking like for everyone, this looked awesome. Like, okay, so everyone knew already that you were one of the talents from Europe and you just couldn't play because of your ban. So Cloud9 famously, yeah, they used to be really good in NA LCS, but they never used to do anything outside of NA. So what everyone always used to think was, right, what they need to do is upgrade mid lane if they can, because everyone used to say back then High wasn't as sick. I mean, let's face it, he wasn't compared to the Bjergsens and the Fakers of the world. You know, I think he'd even admit that much. And so when they brought you in, everyone really thought, right, there's a really good chance for things to go amazing here. But the first half of that split was a nightmare. And I remember, even in our interview very early on, before it had really all played out, when I went back, there are kind of some clues in how you're talking about. Because even though you couldn't literally say, like, Meteos is not a good jungler for me, I mean, that's basically the change that was made. He was removed as the jungler. High came back in. And I noticed a lot of the comments you'd said back then was stuff like that you felt like you needed a jungler who like focused around you more, who like warded for you more, that was hard for you to feel comfortable with your playing style at the time. What can you say about that? Because obviously the team did eventually decide to remove Meteos at that point in time, at least. And then bizarrely High did a role swap to jungle back then. So what was the first period like with Cloud9?
I would say, although I didn't agree with the way Meteos played, I don't actually think that he was the core problem as to why that we were such a bad team. I think it was just that everyone else on that roster was so used to playing with High that when they lost High, we had no sense of like how to play the great game on a macro level. Like when High came in, you know, I got to experience what it was like playing with High, and you know, he would just be constantly talking. Like he would literally like call for TPs, like call the lane assignments and everything. So you know, the players, they were just used to that. So when High left, it was a completely different team. So I think that was the main problem as to why Cloud9 in my first split was so bad.
So, okay, this is one of the interesting things, though, because actually people won't remember it now, because now everyone understands after seeing him role swap to support and jungle and now go and play for another team on his own. I think everyone knows now he's clearly like a god-tier shot caller that's just very, very good at that role. But what's funny is when he actually first left Cloud9, everyone thought it would be fine. In fact, everyone said back then, because they'd had, as you said, the same 5-man lineup the whole time, because it was never any players changing, everyone thought, okay, I'm sure he is a very good shot caller, but maybe some of the others take a part in it, you know, like famously, I think they said like Meteos used to call the objectives, you know, and then like, you know, the other ones maybe would, I don't know, like Balls would call if you needed something top lane or something. They tried to make it sound like everyone did an even part. But when High left, what was the shot calling actually like in Cloud9?
I don't think there was any. There was no such thing as like players would try to take a part of High's role. It would just be completely dead. I think Meteos tried, but like it was obviously not the same as with High. So it was mainly just Meteos like trying to call objectives and such. But we didn't actually have the proper grasp of how to play the game on like a macro level, like how to set up the lanes before going to objectives and all that kind of thing. So we were basically just like playing our own game and hoping it would work out, but it was terrible.
So one of the interesting things is, like I say, when you first started the split, like people could see by your own performances that you weren't comfortable in the team. And then on top of that, like I said in my interview, you even kind of like implied as much. You weren't the guy who came in with like the false confidence, like, no, everything's fine, like it's all just great, You could kind of tell there was something was a bit off. So what I want to know is, it only took that split. I mean, by the time you got to the regionals, you individually were looking really good. And in fact, what's funny is, I would say, if I look at you in Cloud9 since that early struggling period, one thing I've always been impressed by was it felt like you got a really good sense for how to play your game. And so even if the team did badly sometimes, or the game was going badly, you did that thing that, it's one of the things that's always impressed me about Froggen. It's like, even if he's in a game where he's not doing super well in lane or something like that, it's like he always knows how to still have a chance later on in the game. Like he knows how to play, essentially. So what changed, do you think? How did he become so comfortable after being so uncomfortable early?
I would say it was mainly High. He helped me a lot. He was trying to like give me advice in a way as well, and like just make me confident in a way. Like, he wouldn't care if mistakes happened or anything. So, and he would always just look to pressure and be very selfless in the way he played. So it was really easy to work together with High because, we would just do stuff together and work together. And that kind of, I'd say it gave me a better grasp of how to like play together with your jungler. And I think that's probably the most important thing as a mid laner. Like, you have to understand how the jungle role works and what's best for you and the jungler. So I think playing with High, that kind of helped me a lot to understand how to play better in a competitive environment.
Yeah, so I mean, this is obvious an area where, again, it's not like we can just blame Meteos entirely, because you'd never played competitively before. So you'd never played, properly with a jungler where, like, you and that guy are kind of going to be attached at the hip for the rest of your careers. So what do you think was different from playing all those solo queue games where you're doing fantastically back in Europe? What's different in competitive when you play with a jungler?
Well, the thing is, in solo queue, back then the meta was completely different. Like, mid lane snowballed a lot harder, so you could just take over the game by yourself. But in competitive, people will play more safe and they won't just get solo killed over and over. And you actually need to do stuff together with your jungle to get vision and all that kind of thing. But the problem I had with Meteos was the way he played was he would play very, very efficient, like mainly just focus on being ahead of the enemy jungler, which is, in my opinion, the wrong way to approach the game, because I think the most important thing is that you control the map together. Like, you get vision, you invade, you pressure. That's how I thought the game should be played. But even though he did invade from time to time, if you look at other junglers, they'll just go to enemy camps if it's a good timing. But like, he would always make sure that his jungle would be cleared, just try to be as efficient as possible before doing that. Like, he wouldn't want to take risks. Like, if we invaded and there wouldn't be anything or it would go wrong, then we just wouldn't go for it. So we played a very slow game. Like, as a mid laner, you can't really play aggressive unless you have vision of like enemy jungler, because otherwise you put yourself at risk. So in that sense, I had to adapt and just play really safe, because if we never really get like proper vision, then as a mid laner, you can't really do anything. And that's kind of the same way it works right now. So it was just really hard for me to do anything when I played with Meteos the very first time.
So when you had this epic run to Worlds, where you had to start in the first round and you had to play 3 whole best of 5s, 2 of them went all the way to 5 games just to make it to Worlds, I remember there was this interview where the headline they picked for it was like, whoever decided the headline, this was like an A+ job, because it was a really great line. And it's this one you probably remember where High said that he told you, if you carry me, then I'll carry you to Worlds. Something along those lines. It was like a really great way to phrase it, because obviously it kind of showed that at the time, Cloud9, a lot of the players were like semi-slumping, and it was a team that it wasn't as good as it had been before, but you were like in very good form yourself. And at the same time, High's not going to carry the whole game from the jungle, but we know, as you're kind of talking about here, with the shot calling, to some degree, he could kind of like elevate the team. So was that just like a great interview line, or what, did he really have some sort of discussion like that with you?
I think he actually said something like that at the end of the... Because right before we were 7th place, it was the last week of LCS, and we had 2 games left, and I don't remember exactly how it played out, but we had to win them both, I think, to get into playoffs. But we lost.
Regional.
Yeah. Sorry, to the gauntlet whatever it's called. Then we lost the first game against TDK, and so we had to rely on another team beating someone else, and we had to beat TSM.
Yes.
And then even if that happened, we would end up in a tiebreaker with, I think it was Team 8 or something. So that's exactly what happened. We lost to TDK somehow, and then we beat TSM. Then we went on to play the tiebreaker versus Team 8. And I think at the end of the game, I think Hai actually said that quote, if I remember correctly. So yeah, it was pretty funny.
Okay. What was the actual gauntlet run like then? Because, I mean, here's the thing. Even though you made it through, and people now remember most of the members of this team went on to more success in LCS and making finals and stuff, that was pretty close, that gauntlet run. I mean, I remember the tip series especially. Like, that was like on a knife edge to some degree.
Yeah. Honestly, I think we kind of got lucky. Because I don't think we, like, played super well or anything. I think everyone in the gauntlet was just more or less pretty bad compared to the other teams. Like, I think TSM and CLG were, like, by far better than everyone else. And then Liquid was kind of expected to be, you know, the third best team. But yeah. I think the reality was that everyone in that gauntlet was just really bad. And we had our practice leading up to it wasn't even, like, anything special. Like, it was pretty much the same. Like, I wasn't expecting us to win it or anything. I think, you know, in a way, we got lucky, but at the same time, I guess we played a bit better. But so it was a pretty surreal feeling.
So when you got to Worlds itself, like I said, when you consider how close it was, and plus, like when you're saying here that everyone was pretty bad, I remember one thing that a lot of people famously said about this run was that it just looked like none of the other teams knew how to play series play, you know, like in actual, like when it got to a really clutch game, they all just kind of like shit the bed, you know, whereas obviously like having high shot calling is another area it's useful to have that, you know, people are experienced and know what to do under pressure. So as a result, when you got to Worlds, I think pretty much everyone was like, okay, like, well done for winning the regionals, but nothing's going to happen at Worlds. Because if you remember, the group you had at Worlds was, like, unbeaten Fnatic from Europe, so it's pretty tough. AHQ was the best team from, like, LMS region. And then, okay, Invictus Gaming ended up doing quite badly, but they were coming in fairly hyped, you know? They had, like, Kakao, they had a rookie, obviously. So this looked like, actually, a terrible group, because normally, if you're an underdog, you want to have the group where it's like you've got one really strong favourite that if you somehow fluked an upset over, then you can get out. You don't want a group like this, where, like, in theory, everyone could beat you. But that first week, I mean, it's magical, right? What happened?
I think it was just the composition we played, and the way we played the map. Like, we would have a bot lane that would just push, and then we would have a pressure mid laner, and then bot lane would just come mid, and then we would just siege down mid towers and just get a lot of random towers because we had the tempo, and the other teams just didn't know how to react to it. So with those comps, we just kept picking off wins and wins somehow and getting early leads when I don't think we should have had those advantages. And I think with the way we worked as a team with high shot calling, usually if we go to like mid-late game, even or ahead, we'd always win. So even though we were outmatched on an individual level in a lot of roles, we just played smarter than them in the first week, I'd say. And yeah, we got a lot of wins. But then the next week happened, and I don't know what happened actually. I don't know if there was like tilt factors or slump as well, but I think people figured us out, and we weren't actually as good as we looked, so it kind of sucked.
When you had this one comp that everyone saw was working, was that really something that was just thought up like in the boot camp? Like why was it so effective against all those teams? You'd think with them all being top teams, you know, had no one else figured this out so early on?
I wouldn't even say it's like specifically the way the comps worked. It was the way we played with the comps. Like, you know, we would just group mid together and just get random towers and they wouldn't expect it. I think, I don't know, it wasn't really anything like we thought of before. We just picked good champions and they worked well together. There wasn't really anything further to it. It was pretty random. Like, we just picked the best champions possible and we made it work somehow.
One of the bizarre things about this run through the regionals and then the first week of Worlds was it felt like Hai at the beginning of the regionals wasn't even a jungler, even though that was his role. Because if you remember in the regionals, like his champion pool died before you even got to Worlds. Like, he started out trying to play Elise and Gragas, the meta champions. And then by the end of the gauntlet, he was playing like Shyvana, which hadn't even been in the meta for like years. Fucking Amumu, which wasn't even working. This was a bad state of affairs, mate. Yet the first week of Worlds, I very distinctly remember this. He played Elise in game and he won on it. So what was High actually like as a jungler at that point in time?
Well, the way High worked as a jungler, he would just play something that he found fun, and if it worked, he would just play it. Like, he didn't just want to like play the same champs over and over. He'd always try to like think of something out of the box. Like, I don't know if he was trying to be edgy or something, but it was just the way it worked. And we just tried out a lot of random junglers, and for the most part, it worked out, and it was pretty funny.
So when we came to the next year, when we came to Season 6, and we had a different Cloud9 roster, because if you remember, this is where High was still in the team, but now he's a support player, and then now you got Rush into the team. And for anyone who doesn't remember back then, especially coming into this particular lineup, Rush was very, very highly touted, because if you remember some of those tip teams, like especially towards the end when they lost Xiao Wei Zhao, it was just like him. He was just having like 1v9 the whole game to win it, But that's exactly what he was quite famous for, I mean, he kind of was one of the few people I've seen where they can do it in solo queue and do it in a game somehow, So your expectations must have been huge having him as your jungler. What were you thinking with him coming in?
Well, I obviously thought, as everyone else thought, I thought that, we'd be the best team, because Russ was probably the best mechanical jungler, at least in North America at the time, and he was really smart when it came to the game. But there were some other problems that happened along the way, so unfortunately it didn't quite give the results that we were hoping for.
Yeah, well, this is the big shock, is that when you got to the playoffs, for anyone who doesn't remember, this was actually back when TSM had like their worst split ever. And then you were the top seed facing them. And everyone I know said, right, Cloud9's going to win this one. TSM's going out. Cloud9's probably going to win the whole season. And yet, bizarrely, they actually beat you reasonably handedly. What happened going into that series? I mean, in the regular split, you were doing really well.
Yeah, I think there was multiple factors. I think TSM improved a lot. Like, props to them. They were a garbage team. Then they became really good. And leading up to playoffs, like, I think Rush kind of got tired of living in NA. So he dropped everything he was doing. Like, he wasn't playing solo queue. He just wasn't practicing. He was just, I don't know if he was like depressed, but he was just sleeping most of the time. And then because he wasn't really playing solo queue, like if you looked at his match at his league account at the time, he was 49% win ratio, stuck in Diamond 2. And if you think the season before that, he was rank 1 in NA solo queue and the very best. Like, that's not to take anything away from the way he played, but I think because he didn't really play the game very much, we didn't really understand the meta that much, so we ended up playing Kindred every game. Because he got some advice from Meteos that Kindred was really good, and we played the same jungler over and over, didn't really adapt, and it didn't turn out that good. And I'm not trying to say like Rush lost us the game or anything, or the series or anything, because I think, like I said, TSM played really well, and yeah, I don't think me and Rush like clicked together as well as we probably could have. But it was really hard, because to me, it felt like he didn't really want to play that much. But, he's a really good guy. So it sucked a lot, for sure.
Because one of the interesting things about this split, which is why I wondered what the relationship with the jungler was like, was if everyone remembers, another reason why in Season 5 it made a little bit of sense that it was like hard to adapt early on, is that like Season 5 was where like everyone was just playing like control mages again, there was like tons of that type of mid lane. And obviously, most famously, when you were in solo queue, you were spamming all the assassins, that's what everyone remembers you for. So I would have thought coming into spring, you'd be all over the new meta. Like, I remember at the time when Perkz was going off in Europe, it's like every game he just picked Corki because it was broken as fuck in mid lane. But you barely ever played champ status. So what was your champion pool like at this time?
I remember specifically, I hated playing Lulu. I remember Lulu was meta. I didn't really want to play it myself because I think the mentality I had back then was pretty bad. Like I didn't want to play that champion because I felt like she was boring. Hindsight, I probably should have. But I think besides that, my champion pool was pretty fine. Like I played a lot of Orianna, which is a champion I've had a lot of success on. And other than that, I think I just played a bit of everything. Honestly, there was nothing out of the ordinary at that time. But I didn't enjoy Corki Mid either for some reason. I played against it a bit, and I felt like it was really easy to play against. So I just never really picked it up myself, even though it was really easy to play. I just never. I didn't feel like I could impact the game as much if I were to play on something that would just like scale and have like slight pressure, but not like a playmaking champion. It's a playmaking champion with the way the passive worked, but you'd need to like work really well together with your team to like make properly use of it. So I felt like if I just picked a champion where I could make the biggest impact myself, it would be the easiest way for us to win the game. So that was kind of the mentality I had at the time. That's also why I shied away from Lulu.
When you were figuring out like what champions to play, so are you someone who actually, did you ever watch like the European games to see what the mids over there were doing?
Yeah, for sure. I always check. I didn't always watch all the games, but I would always check to see what other regions were playing and so on.
What was it actually like back at this time? Because, you know, like now, what's funny is right now the mid lane meta means you've got all kinds of different players to play against in NA. But back then, yeah, you had Bjergsen and you had like a couple of people, you know, but like Froggen hadn't come over yet. You know, there wasn't as many mid lane talents. So when you play NA solo queue, like what could you take from that?
Back then, I don't know. I didn't really have a serious approach to solo queue because, you know, I couldn't feel the impact myself when I first came over. Like, I felt like I wouldn't learn anything. But in Europe, even like just random mid laners in Challenger would actually like sometimes give me a challenge on a mechanical level. But playing NA solo queue, it legit just felt like I wouldn't learn anything from playing against the players I did. But I think back then I had a really bad approach to how the game should be played in a way, or at least how to take solo queue seriously, because I was just thinking everyone else is pretty bad, so I wouldn't learn anything. But I think the most important thing is to just figure out stuff on your own, like what's the best way for you to improve on your own, and like just learn the limits of champions and so on. So instead I kind of just gave up, didn't take solo queue seriously at all, because I felt like everyone else was bad. So I didn't really learn much back then.
How good did you get at that now? How good are you at kind of like figuring out a way to improve without someone like beating you, basically?
So the approach I take now is a bit different because I still feel like the players aren't really that good. Like, I don't actually play mid lane very much in solo queue anymore because I don't feel like there's anything for me to learn playing against these players. I think I figured out most of how when it comes to like how to play the game on a macro level and so on. So I'm basically just playing other roles to like try to get a better understanding of how other roles work, more specifically jungle, so that I can always have a really good understanding of when a jungler is going to want to gank me and so on. So yeah, like I said, I only really play mid lane in solo queue right now if there's a new champion I want to try to learn or a new build I want to experiment with, because I don't really find it challenging playing mid lane against just random mid laners, because I feel like I don't learn anything, honestly.
So when we came to the summer split, we had yet another roster move, and this time it was quite a bizarre one, because obviously High left because he went to go and play in the Challenger team, you know, so you lost the shot caller, and it was actually Meteos who came back in because Balls also went to the Challenger team, and then you got Impact as your top liner. Right, what was it like the second time around with Meteos? Because, I mean, obviously, people were very critical of him over this split and Worlds, you know? So what was different the second time around?
Honestly, the beginning of the second time around, we immediately went to Korea to bootcamp, and, you know, I legit felt like we were the best team back then. I think we had like an 80% win ratio or something while we were in Korea. You know, we were beating
Korean teams and stuff?
Versus, like, most of the top teams, besides like we didn't scrim against SKT, I don't remember if we scrimmed rocks, but we were like, we would be destroying the Taiwanese top teams. Also, we would have really good results against the Chinese teams like RNG and such. Like we would just win everything, and teams like TSM and such were there too, and our records against all the other teams were insanely high, and I felt like we were gonna come back and we would just smash everyone. But I think at some point in the Korean boot camp there was some problems in the team. I think me and Meteos clashed a bit. Like we didn't always agree on how the game should be played. So I think me and Meteos kind of had problems again. So I wouldn't say that was like the factor as to why we didn't get the results that we were expected to have. But it wasn't as good as it could have been.
I mean, even when you say that though, like this is your first final, before that, like we said, you hadn't made playoffs the first split, and then the next one, everyone thought you were going to do well. You got bounced by TSM first, but you made it to the finals this time, so it can't have been terrible. Something must have worked in the team.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it was just terrible because, I was expecting us to really beat TSM as well because, at the time in Korea, we were scrimming TSM a lot as well, and, it felt really easy. So I was kind of expecting us to take that back when we came back from Korea. But then when we came back from Korea and came to NA, we started to scrim a lot of the worst teams. And I don't know if it like changed our meta, but for some reason we just played worse. I can't even pinpoint what specifically it was, but yeah, I think if you play against bad teams, you'll get bad habits. And I don't know if that's what happened, but yeah.
How did the shot calling work without High in the lineup? Like how did you change up how it was done? Did it change the style of the team?
I would say that was also at the time Reapered came in, so he helped us a lot with how to play the game on a macro level and just shot call and everything in general. I wouldn't say there was any specific shot caller. I think everyone talked a lot, and if someone was quiet or didn't talk a lot before, like we had a lot of players who didn't talk a lot before because we were used to High. So Reapered would be like, he would like help us and tell us to speak up more and tell us what we should say in certain situations. So I think during Korea, the boot camp, we all learned a lot how to communicate and just play the game on a macro level altogether.
Does Reapered have a different idea of how a mid laner should play than Jensen?
I don't think so. I mean, he might have, but usually I think Reapered is good at like adapting to the way his player works. He doesn't really tell people to change up their styles. If there's anything, he'll be like, "Oh, you should try this," and then we'll try it and we'll see how it goes. His mentality is always like, you should always try something if you're not sure about it. So that's kind of how it goes. But other than that, I wouldn't say no.
So one of the really great moments in this lineup was when you played Immortals in the semi-finals, because again, Immortals had a fantastic split again. They were looking so good, like almost no one could beat them. What happened in this series? Because I mean, even though famously, like, in the spring split, they looked like they just choked out, right? This one, they really came to play. So what happened in this one?
I think Immortals at the time was really dominant because the way they played together with Huni and Reignover. Reignover would camp for Huni and Huni would snowball and take over, but that didn't really work against Impact because Impact would always hold his own even though he'd get camped a lot. So normally IMT just smashes the top side of the map, but since Impact is a really, really good defensive player, like, he rarely ever falls behind, and even if he does, he plays it really well from behind, so they couldn't really do that against us. So they weren't as dominant against us as they were against other teams, I'd say.
Okay. So then when you did get to this final, even as you said, with the problems in the split and maybe like people weren't all on the same page, it sounds like you thought you were going to win the LCS. Yeah.
In the finals, I think the meta we played wasn't necessarily the best. Like, I was playing Vel'Koz 2 games in a row because I played it a lot in scrims, and it had really good results in scrims, but I think it was mainly so good because every time I would just solo kill the enemy mid laner, so I kind of got a bad read on Vel'Koz as a champion because I played it specifically into Cassiopeia only, and yeah, I would just solo kill Cassio, win the game, but that doesn't really work. That didn't really work against TSM. And we gave them, I think first game we won, we took Cassio. I think first game was really weird because we just smashed them all around. Like, I think we had solo kills in every lane. Then they adapted, and then they took Cassio every single game, or the next 2 games, and we took Valkos. Didn't really work out. I would also say there were some internal problems again, like during the set, which kind of made it difficult for me, but I don't really want to get into it too much. But I couldn't really focus too well after the first 3 games. I was pretty tilted. But yeah, I think Cassio as a champion was really high priority back then, but that was something we didn't really realize. Like, we won the first game, but we didn't specifically think it was because of champions or anything. It was more how they just fell over the first game, and then me and Meteos didn't really synergize too well together, so we had a lot of misplays when it came to us working together. So it made it pretty hard. I think we mainly lost because of me and Meteos like not playing properly together. That's it. And TSM was just a better team.
Whenever people talk about you and Bjergsen and like whether you have a rivalry, they usually want it to be like, because Cloud9 fans and TSM fans in general like are fairly friendly, you know, people usually want it to be like, oh yeah, they have a rivalry, but they're just really good friends, you know, they just love each other. Whereas like, I know from knowing a lot of competitors, if someone's good and they know they're good and their rival is always winning, then what they often think in their mind is like, okay, I'll give him credit, he did win those times, but you know what, maybe he had a better team sometimes, and then, you know, maybe my team wasn't quite as good. You know, if we ever had even teams, if I ever had a chance, then I'd beat him. Mm-hmm. Is there any feeling like this towards Bjergsen?
Yeah, I would say kind of, yeah. I would say I felt like that up until the last finals, because I think I actually felt like the last finals we just lost, I felt like we were the better team, but we just didn't show it, and you know, we made a lot of mistakes and we got punished for it. But I kind of felt like this time around was actually the time where, you know, I had the better team and we worked better together as a team than TSM did, but we still fell short. But you know, I don't know, I wouldn't say it's exactly like that, because sometimes we just lose because, you know, they played better. It's not, oh, he played better.
Sure.
So I'm not like gonna blame it on my team, because there's times where we lose because I get outperformed. Like, I don't always play better than him.
After the seasons where you had to just play in solo queue and you would dominate everyone, and you probably wished, like, if I ever got a crack at the LCS, you know, like, imagine what I could do. One thing I've noticed that you can never really appreciate if you're someone who's never been at a really hard competitive level is that I always describe it like as though you're going up a ladder, right? There's like rungs to it. Like, okay, at first you have to be really good online. Then you have to be able to perform at all offline. You know, people are often very nervous initially. Then even at that point, if you get very good, you have to then start to be able to play in the playoffs, you know. And in fact, what's funny about your career is if we look at the placings, you're almost literally climbing up the ladder rung by rung. You know, you start out, you have an okay split, and then you get to the first round of the playoffs, then you get to the final. So we're still waiting for that top step where you win the LCS. And so, has being a competitive player, is it different to play like the big pressure game when it's the final? Is that different from the other games?
I would say in a way, yeah, but I wouldn't say it's entirely right. I don't really feel the pressure too much, but last finals, I really felt under pressure because, you know, we go down 0-2, we get completely smashed, and we didn't really look like a team. Like, we weren't really a challenge. So then that makes you wonder, like, what are we doing wrong? Like, what should we be doing differently? And you always have it in the back of your mind that if you lose the next match, you're out. So in that sense, if you start to fall behind, you can start to feel the pressure. But me as a player, I've played a lot of best of fives, and I've won a lot of reverse sweeps. So I wouldn't really say that the pressure gets to me in that way. I think people kind of look at me that way, but I don't think that's entirely true. I don't really have a problem with playing in playoffs normally. But yeah, like you said, normally I can look very dominant in the season, but always fall short at playoffs. I think the way the season works, it's pretty hard as a player because you play for like, you grind for like, how long is it? 9 weeks of LCS, and you basically just play to get into playoffs. It doesn't feel rewarding at all. So I get really burned out when I have to play out through 9 weeks. That might just be me though, but I personally think the way the system works is really bad because it doesn't feel rewarding at all when you just win the regular games. So sometimes I kind of like slump later on during the regular season because I just don't have the same motivation as I do in the start of the season.
So then let me ask you this then. How does Bjergsen do it? How does he get to every final? How does he, like, even when he's having not that great a splits, but he turns it around? How do you think he does it? What do you think his secret is?
Well, usually during the regular season, I'd say I always outperform him. Some people might disagree, but that's just how I see it. But I think maybe he just puts more effort when it comes into playoffs. I would say I put in a lot of effort too when it comes to playoffs, but unfortunately, I always lose for some reason.
So people saw, especially after this last finals, like, one thing they've learned to do in LCS, I've noticed on the production crew, is actually what always used to be the specialty of the Korean casts, which is that they were always the best ever at when a big moment happens, like doing the face cam on the player, you know? Like, you've got to get the player who, like, fucked up the moment or who had the really good moment, you know? And that reaction, even though we can see in the game what happened, that really is, like, very telling. And they've caught you twice now in these last two finals where you did a moment where it was a misplay, or you just lost the game. Whether it was a misplay at the times is irrelevant, really. It's the outcome. And in all these instances, it's not a good look. What you're like shaking. You look like you're just losing your shit completely. So when you tell me that you don't feel like pressure gets to you, in those moments the pressure got to you, right?
Yeah, but I think that's mostly like an after effect because normally it doesn't. Normally when I play, I'm totally fine. It's just when I screw up, that's when it happens, So I wouldn't really say. I think you could make that argument if I was like playing differently before that, but then it's just I make one mistake and I realize it, and then I feel bad about it, or I have a reaction. But during the actual games, like I feel totally fine. But I think specifically that last game, game 5, that game should have been ours, but we were playing overly cautious, I guess. Like, I should have never been in that situation in the first place because I should have just been top lane, split pushing, not having group. Like, I think my decision making was definitely different because of the high pressure situation. But I wouldn't actually say that, I played it differently. I mean, I did play differently, but I don't think that because it was game 5 or whatever, or playoffs, that actually changed how I died or anything.
Since every role has its own job, and oftentimes what people think is lame about mid lane is the idea that, like, especially if you're playing like a massive AP burst champion, then you're just going to dump all this burst in and kill someone. But what it means is if you're ever in that kind of scenario, like game 5, like the whole game on the line in one team fight, actually is going to be a massive amount of pressure on someone as to like perfectly mechanically pull off what they want to do. If they're a second too late, they lose the whole game, they get caught by the CC. If there's second too soon, maybe that block. It must be tough to deal with that, right?
Yeah, for sure. Another thing is, in game 5, I was playing an assassin, so it's harder to play than just a regular mage. Because as a mage, you're a lot safer, but as an assassin / diver champion, you have to sometimes take risks or put yourself in a position where you're more vulnerable than just a normal control mage. So in that sense, it was just riskier, I guess. I don't know.
One thing I've noticed that's been interesting about all the times you've played for C9 now over the years is that it's not just the meta shifting that changes what champions you play. Like, sure, you might play something like Orianna if it's available. Like, you have a few champions that you go back to. But actually, in general, if we look throughout the splits you've played, you go all over the place in terms of the meta. Whereas actually, one of the things that obviously everyone in the other roles complains about mid lane like fuck about is the fact that if there's anything broken, usually the mid laners are the ones who just spam it all day long. They just play Syndra every game, or, you know, Corki, like I said, with Perkz back in the day. Why doesn't Jensen specialize more? Why do you just tend to mix it up all the time?
Well, if you look at right before playoffs, the last 2 weeks, I was only playing Orianna like 2 weeks in a row. So in that sense, I was just playing what was best, or what was OP. But I don't think I'm going out of my way to not play what's best. I think usually I pick what works best for us as a team and what we've had best results with, because it's not only my decision what to play, because, you know, Reapered's there too, and he'll give his input and say what he thinks is best. So usually that's why I end up in a situation with something that might look differently, because we've had better results with something else. That's usually what happens.
Okay, so that's something I wanted to ask about then. When we've talked about a lot of these key games here, and depending on what champion you're on, that obviously defined like what was possible if you're playing like Vel'Koz or if you're playing Orianna, whatever it might be. A lot of mid laners, because they want to feel comfortable, you know, in the big pressure game. I've heard a lot of them. I mean, famously, Prolly told me that Ryu used to be like this. If it was the big pressure game, then it's like he would want to pick his own champion. Like, he would want the champion that he felt like, you know, no matter what happens, I'm always going to be comfortable. I'm going to know what's going to happen, as a way to kind of like alleviate some of the pressure. In general, though, you're just leaving it more up to the team comp and the coach. You let them pick the champion to a degree?
I would say sort of. Like, for example, I'll just use our last game against TSM as an example. You know, what side were we? I think we were blue side. Yeah, we were blue side. So at that point in the series, Syndra was a really high priority champion. It won all the games previously. We're both really good Syndra players. But I also had Ekko as a pick into it, which is, I wouldn't say it's a counter. It's definitely not a counter, even though a lot of people think it is. I don't think Ekko counters Syndra by any means, but it's a pick where you can play it into Syndra because it does fine against it in the lane, and it does fine outside of the lane because you can split push with it. So we had the option. We could either first pick Syndra and make our overall team comp worse because they'll get 2 OPs and we'll just get Syndra, or we can take an OP, give them Syndra, and then get something better in return for other lanes. So in those kind of scenarios, I'm fine with sacrificing my pick if it means we're going to get something better for the team.
Okay, that makes sense. So one of the interesting details, again, in terms of a roster move that happened coming to this split, was that, again, it was another jungler change. Now you got to have contractz, who was kind of like coming into LCS as a rookie. What would you describe, like, what was his style with you? Like, did you synergize well? Did he figure it out? Because it seemed like he was a guy where, as an outsider, the first part of the split looked great, but then it felt like he maybe had some issues at times.
I would say playing with contractz is really easy because he's just really down to earth. Like, he doesn't have an ego. You know, he's a young player, and never really had any problems with him. He's really easy to work with. So playing with contractz is really easy because if there's something we mess up, you know, we just work it out together. Whereas, you know, me and Meteos, we'd kind of clash, and it would be hard to talk with him about some of the issues or picks or problems or whatever. But with contractz, it's just a lot easier for me personally to work with him.
Did you watch much? Do you watch much LCK?
I wouldn't say I've watched much, but I watched some.
Okay, because I wanted to ask you, as someone who I've said has got a very deep champion pool and tends to play whatever you think works in the meta, One of the things I found quite bizarre was when I watched this season of LCK, like everyone already knows Faker can like play almost anything he wants and he does change it up a lot. But some of the ones he played this season was like, okay, yeah, he played the same stuff as you, Orianna, Ryze, but then he had this whole bunch of other champions where he played like Talon 4 times, Katarina 4 times, he even played a fucking Vladimir game, like he just Jace a bunch of times. Can anyone else do that? Is he just doing something bizarre that he can get away with doing this stuff? Because I didn't see these in the meta of like Bjergsen and Jensen and everyone else, you know.
I would say all those champs are something that I've been practicing a lot, but it never really looked like a really good scenario to pull it off. I looked at a lot of the pick and bans in Korea specifically, and I think, you know, I was looking at Faker, and you know, sometimes in the situation he picks those champions, I'm like, wait, what is he doing? He's actually crazy. But then it still works out somehow. So I think, you know, it looks to me like he doesn't really care too much about what he plays against. He'll just, if he's feeling something, he'll just play it. Whereas to me, there's expected results when it comes to matchups. Like, I don't want to play Vladimir if I know that there's a champion that counters Vladimir that is open, then I don't want to take the risk to pick it if I could pick something that's just much safer and easier to play with. So I think Faker just, it seems like in a lot of situations he just doesn't care too much or too worried about getting counterpicked. So I think he just picks whatever he wants.
So obviously, when you went to Worlds, you got to play Faker in some official games. You were in the same group as him at Worlds, and then presumably, if you've been to boot camps, I'm sure you've played before and since against him. What is it actually like to play against him? Because even though everyone knows the like hype line you said, where you said you were going to clap Faker, like there's one thing to just say a cool line in an interview, but going into actually playing him in an official game, did you actually really think like maybe he'll do super well? Because I feel like a lot of people, especially if you're really good domestically, they kind of feel like, okay, yeah, he's amazing, but like, you know, I've never played him, so maybe I'll just do really well against him. What did you think it was going to be like?
I felt like I'd be fine, you know, like I definitely think he's really good, but I don't think he's like unbeatable by any chance. I think, okay, so what happened that first game is I ended up playing the Casio versus the Syndra matchup, and I obviously got pretty destroyed. I don't think that's news to anyone. Okay. But what happened was I knew Syndra at the time was a really, really good champion, but we didn't actually expect him to first pick it. So it kind of ended up being really bad for us because I played the reason why we didn't ban it was because we didn't expect it to first pick it. And in the case it did pick it, I had the Casio into it because I actually played the Casio versus Syndra in scrims a few times. I played like 3 times against Ryu, and it actually went really well. So I kind of felt I thought the matchup was fine, but then I played against Faker, and you know it was a different story. But I think Faker is really, really good, but you know I don't think by any means he's like unbeatable. I think the first game he had a really good matchup, and you know he abused it, but second time around it was more evenly matched, I'd say. But yeah, his movements is really good, and yeah, he's just a 10 out of 10 player, I'd say.
Obviously it hasn't worked yet, but do you have a sense of what the style you have to play against Faker is? Like how do you face off against him? What do you think the secret is?
I don't really think there's like a secret. I think League of Legends as a game is pretty, it's not too complicated once you're at like the top level, so I don't think there's too much outstanding stuff you can do like when it comes to like playing the lane and like map movements and stuff. So I wouldn't really say there's like anything too differently you have to do against him. I think he's just better because he's like mechanically really good and he has really good movements, and he usually just understands what's the best for him to do. He rarely makes mistakes. So I think that's just what makes him a great player. Like, he rarely makes mistakes.
So obviously, what was bizarre was, by coming second in the group, you actually got on what was the easier side of the bracket, bizarrely. But it's not for you, because you had to play Samsung Galaxy in the first round. So it was for everyone else. So obviously, that means you played against Crown. And for a lot of people who didn't watch LCK, they learned at Worlds, like Crown's pretty fucking good mid lane. So what was he actually like to play against?
I felt like Crown was really, really good. I think he's probably around the same level as Faker, honestly. At least his laning phase, like he's really good at laning. Like he pressures you a lot, and he has insane mechanics. Like you saw, I don't know if you saw the first game, but we tried to free man gank him, and he actually killed one of us and got away with it. So he has really good mechanics, and he's a really good player. But at the same time, I don't think he like outmatched me on anything in that set. Like I think throughout the series against Samsung, I played. I don't know if I'd say I played better than him, but during the laning phase, like I had the edge most of the time at least.
So one of the weird things is that after these two worlds that you've been to, where, I mean, again, the results got better, you were in the group stage one time, then you got to the round of 8. Even though Cloud9 never really had any chance of winning any of these worlds, like no one really ever would have said anything as crazy as that, you know, and it was all about like doing the best you can. In both times, everyone was pretty complimentary about your performances. Like they were like, you individually did pretty well, you know, it seemed like it went generally well. What do you have a sense of what is the gap between where Cloud9 is and where those teams that can go really deep are? I mean, admittedly, by the way, I don't just mean Western teams, because there is a famous rule which is correct for everyone, which is that no one beats Korean teams in best of 5. So it's just about when you play them, you know. Like, I mean, everyone thinks H2K did super well. They did, but they just didn't play any Koreans till the semi-finals. Yeah. So what's missing, do you think, to get up to the next level as a team?
Honestly, like, the impression I have of Korean teams as to why they play so well together is their map control and their vision control. Like, if you specifically just pay attention to how well they control vision and macro, then you'd be super impressed. Like, you'll see them like just randomly running really deep into the jungle and just get a pink ward there, and it'll just be unnoticed. No one will even see it for like another 20 minutes. So they'll just have all this knowledge about what you're doing without you even knowing it, because they're just really smart when it comes to the game. I don't think like on an individual level they're like much better than us, because every time I play against, like during practice as well, like when I scrim against the Koreans, like, you know, I'll sometimes win, I'll sometimes get solo kills and such. Like, I don't think they're like better than me individually by any means, but I think they just play really well together as a team, and they're just really, really smart when it comes to just playing the game in general. Yeah, I don't really know what else there is to it, because every time it's just really hard to play against them, because whenever you get vision against Korean teams, it'll always just get removed completely so fast. So I think they just really work really well together as a team.
So when you came over to Cloud9, I remember one of the things that made it a really interesting move is, if you look at other players who come in as rookies into LCS, usually the expectations are quite realistic. You know, it's like, okay, well, they're a rookie, so we've got to give them time, you know, and then let's see how they do before anyone hypes them up as the best. But because, like I said, of the storyline, that Cloud9 was always just all NA players, and famously, obviously, like by then, TSM had started to win over Cloud9 again. I know for someone like Jack, for example, that even if TSM is beating you, Party is like, yeah, but you've got Bjergsen, you know, like we've just got all NA players. So I'm pretty sure when he got Incarnation in, he thought, right, I've got my own Bjergsen here. And that's what everyone's expectation was, right? Cloud9's got their own Bjergsen now. Now we're going to win all the titles. Do you think that's the expectation people should have?
I don't think so, but I don't know, actually. I mean, I think it's, I don't think individual play matters too much in how League of Legends works lately. I think it's more how you work together as a team and how smart you are at the game. Like, yeah, I think it's mostly just about working well together right now, rather than just individual play.
When I looked up, obviously most of the splits where Cloud9 had high as the mid laner used to be back the old format, you know, where it was like you played like 28 games, or, you know, you played a lot less matches. Whereas in the splits where you've been playing recently, you play tons, you know, because you play all the best of 3s. Mm-hmm. And when I looked it up, amazingly, you're not that far off, actually, having played more games as the Cloud9 mid laner than High has. So here's my question for you. Are you ready for one day the mid laner of Cloud9 is going to be remembered as Jensen? It's not going to be remembered as High, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that's where we're going right now, because I mean, that should be where we're going because High is on a completely different team right now. But he was also the face of Cloud9, so I can totally understand that. But yeah, I hope to leave my mark here.
So obviously, like as a player, you're not a natural shot caller, so in that sense, High's very different. But one thing I've noticed over time that tends to be the case is if you're going to be like a star player, okay, there's very different types of leadership, okay? You don't have to be the leader who literally shot calls everything. That can be a different role entirely. But I've noticed in a lot of the best teams, the people who are the star players do have to become a kind of leader, you have to kind of know how to motivate the guys who aren't doing as well, or how to get a player who plays with you and give him confidence in you. And you don't have High with you anymore, so how have you developed in that respect? Is it something that you're cognizant of that you have to improve in this respect?
Yeah, I'd say, as you grow up, you also mature a lot more, and you think about what's the best way to improve as a team and such. So like when it comes to discussions about what we should have done and what we should do, I'd say I play a pretty big role because I think it's really important that we're always in the best situation we can be, and we always look at the mistakes we make instead of just try to ignore them. So I'd say in that aspect, I stepped up a lot.
So I notice in the past, okay, this just shows how long League of Legends has been going. People's opinions change all the time. But if you go back a few seasons to where Froggen was on Alliance and then he was on Elements, so he was doing well and then he was not doing very well. Back then, because Bjergsen was really he was hitting his prime, a lot of people used to be very cut and dry and be like, oh, Bjergsen's way better than Froggen right now. Froggen doesn't play the game the right way. But I noticed in all my interviews I've ever done with you, you've always actually been very complimentary towards Froggen's style of play, even when at the time, one of them was getting much better results than the other. So back when Froggen was in his best years, his best results was back when you weren't able to play. And now, obviously, he plays on a team where, because he didn't just go to the highest bidder, he went on this weird side project to go with Ekko Fox, and they've obviously not been able to get the same talent. I mean, he's been doing terribly in terms of team results the last few seasons. So Jensen's better mid laner than Froggen right now, right?
Yeah, I think back then I was mainly looking at how it plays in terms of individual play, and back then I would say that Froggen was better. But I think right now I don't think he's playing the map correctly. I don't think he's applying as much pressure as he could. He's really good individually, and if he gets a lead, he will take it and he will snowball a game. But I think Bjergsen as a player is just a more complete player than Froggen right now.
Okay. What do you actually think of the NA mid lane talent then? Because obviously another name that you mentioned was that Ryu came over. And Ryu's a very interesting character because everyone knows a long time ago when he was in Korea, he was amazing then. And in Europe, he was always good. And I think when he had his good performances, people sometimes maybe overrated him a bit. But then he also had some Worlds performances that weren't as crazy, What do you make of someone like Ryu, for example?
I honestly think he's pretty overrated. I think he's good mechanically and individually, but like I said, I think he kind of has the same problem as Froggen, which is what, I'd say me and Bjergsen are top 2, and then everyone else is kind of a bit further down the ladder. And I would say, there's just certain qualities about mid lane that they're both lacking to really push it to the next level. Like if you look at the way the very, very top mid laners are pressuring and moving around the map and just controlling vision and such, you'll notice a big difference, in my opinion. So I think he's kind of overrated.
Okay, so is it not possible anymore, at least to be the best, to play the very passive style and to just kind of farm up and play that way? You have to play with the jungler basically now?
I think people figured out that the best way to get leads in League of Legends now is having a lot of tempo and just having a lot of pressure. So right now, with how League of Legends work, if you're being passive, you're just going to get run over by a good team.
Okay.
So that's why right now the current meta is mostly about having mid laners that can always push or move first, so you can always back up your team. Because like you said, the way Froggen plays, he plays, and I remember specifically he played I don't know if it was this split or the last split, he played Kassadin. But Kassadin as a champion is just not good in a competitive setting unless you're against something where he'll eventually get pressure, because he will just get pushed in, and the other mid laner will just roam or go with his jungler and go for dives and such. So that's why this kind of style is just not working right now.
So at the moment, as we do this interview, MSI's ongoing, and the mid laner for Team World Elite is a guy called Shie, who everyone might remember a long time ago played against TSM in the IEM final. And what's interesting about him as a player is I noticed this is another example of where the diversity in mid lane can be crazy, because actually one of his like pocket pick champs that he's played for the last year is he plays Taliyah quite a lot if he ever gets a chance to. And I've noticed not that many other mid laners seem to run it, and you basically almost never seem to run it. So what do you actually think of this champion? Like, what do you have to do to make it work?
Well, I think Taliyah as a champion is really good if you have a decent laning phase. Like, her problem, Taliyah as a champion's problem is she has some hard matchups, and I don't think Taliyah is really a good champion if you're going to get pressured. So if you know how to like win lane with her or go even, then I think she's a good champion. But to me, if I were to play against a Taliyah, like, I would just smash her in lane usually, and she wouldn't be able to roam or do anything. So that's kind of why I shy away from a champion like Taliyah, unless something like Orianna and Syndra is not on the map, because then, or even Ekko, like even something like Ekko would just destroy Taliyah in my opinion. So that's why I don't think these champions are that amazing, even though some players would prioritize it.
So people know, especially from this last playoffs, that Ekko is something you always seem to have as a pocket pick, and that you seem to like it. It seems to me as a champion, like obviously it was being rung in the top lane last year, and a lot of people were very, very good with it then. And famously, that's what everyone complained about it was, that you could run it as a top lane like tank, and it still did mad damage. Now, obviously, this is a champion where it seems like it's going to be, to me, like a Lee Sin type thing, where no matter how much people nerf it, because of the like utility of the kit, you could always use it to some degree, right? What's the logic of how you use Ekko, do you think?
I think it's just Ekko as a champion is kind of safe and doesn't. If you're really good at Ekko, you can play Ekko into anything, I'd say. So it's kind of just, if I don't know what to pick, I usually just go to Ekko, because it's a comfort pick and I can play it into anything, and it's always good because it can always go in side lane. So anything that can always get side lane pressure is usually a decent pick. So it's just always a good backup pick I have. And I'm confident running it into any pick. So it's just kind of like a least enough mid lane type of pick, yeah.
So one thing I found quite fun for your storyline this split was that when we talked about, you got to play with High, you got to have him be your shot caller as your jungler and then your support. But obviously, because you replaced him, you never got to actually go properly head-to-head with him as a mid laner. So now you've done that, because on FlyQuest, he's obviously been the shot calling mid laner the whole split. Obviously, this isn't necessarily his prime, that was a few years ago. What do you make of High as a mid laner now? What's he like to play against?
He likes to play very risky styles. It's not very calculated styles, so I'd say it's good against players and teams that aren't at the very top, in my opinion, because I just don't think it works against the very best teams, because I think it's too predictable and too risky at the same time. So I think, like I said, versus good teams, you'll just lose out playing that style.
So because Europe has always had this fantastic reputation, which exists to this day, of like, that's just where you get all these mid lane talents come up every year. There's a new one or two we can add to the mix. Perkz is obviously one who's very interesting, because he's had all this success domestically, but then he's had almost no success so far internationally. Now, he's someone where obviously he plays in the NA LCS, but what are your thoughts on him as a mid lane? Like, I mean, yeah, what are your thoughts on him? Just tell me that.
I think he's a really good player. Like, he has really good mechanics and really good movement. Every time I play against him, I think he is. I think if he were to come to NA, he would be a top 3 mid laner, like be with me, Bjergsen. So I think he's a really, really good player. But I think I don't know if he chokes internationally, but for some reason he just haven't had the result so far. I mean, I guess at MSI, I think he played okay. I didn't get to see all of his games because we've been practicing at the same time as MSI has been going on, so I haven't seen all of his play. But in the past, I think he just have had troubles internationally. I'm not exactly sure why, but I think he's a really good player.
So again, this is just hypothetically if I was a mid laner and I was in a similar kind of peer group, okay? I have to say, one thing that I think Perkz maybe has an edge on a lot of people with is that if you look at Bjergsen and you look, I mean, obviously now he's got Svenskeren who's been pretty good at times, but in his career he's had to have some junglers that in the past no one thought were like the best in the world or anything, you know? And then you look at yourself, you've been through a whole bunch of different junglers, like every split pretty much. One thing that certainly seems to help Perkz is he has Trick, right? He has this guy the whole time who's like an MVP candidate. Does that make him look better than he is? What is your take on that?
I'm honestly not sure. I know Trick got MVP in EU, but I don't really know what kind of style he runs because I haven't really paid too much attention to G2 games. But I mean, I think right now communication is the most important thing in League of Legends, and I don't know like how good Trick's English is. So it's hard for me to tell, but it definitely helps if you have a very experienced jungler who happens to be one of the very best too. But I'm not really sure what to make of Trick because so far during MSI, he has had not the best performance.
Okay. So going forwards, if anyone's followed the track that we've gone through so far, all that's left for you is to win NA LCS, right? That's the number one goal.
Yeah, pretty much.
So what has to change for that to happen?
Honestly, I think we've made the changes that we needed to make sure that this time around, if we get to the finals, that we will be in a better state. Because, you know, a lot of people are going to look at the last series against TSM and be like, wow, you know, they could have really turned around that 5th game and won. But I think the core problems was that we got completely smashed the first 2 games. So I think if we can just make sure that we actually have solid games and we are very consistent, that we actually have what it takes to finally win NA LCS.
If you're scouting VODs or you're watching another league, is there a mid laner? It doesn't even have to be the best. Is there just one that you like to watch the most? Is there one that's like either similar to you or you just something about their style of play, like you like to watch them a lot?
I used to like watching Rookie a lot, but I haven't really kept up with him too much lately. Because I remember
appealing about his style of play.
I just remember specifically from, was it Season 5 Worlds? Yeah, when I played against him, like his way of play was, there's just something about it to me. Like he's really, really good in lane. He has really, really, you know, I thought at the time that he was probably the best mid laner I played against. Okay. That was before I played against Fakers, so I don't really want to compare the two. But yeah, he was the mid laner that gave me the most trouble playing against. So I tried looking into his play a bit and try to understand how he played and why.
So I've noticed there's a really weird trend with really highly rated Danish mid laners, which is if I look at Bjergsen, I look at Froggen, one of the things that they have over anyone else who's in their peer group as, you know, the best mids, etc., is they have insane longevity to their careers. Like they've played a long time and they generally, you know, don't have like huge dips of whole seasons or anything. You know, maybe they have the odd slump. And one of the key factors I have to say when I look at it that seems to help contribute to this is that both of them, it's not like anyone has to tell them to practice, you know. They both, for whatever reason, just literally like to play the game so much that they just play tons even now, years into their career. Are you like them in that sense?
I would say sort of like, I like playing the game a lot, but I also have times where I get kind of burned out. But I would say, you know, I don't have the same passion for the game as I did when I first started out. But I still enjoy playing League, and, you know, I don't really do anything else besides playing League. But sometimes I can struggle with enjoying it as much as I did before.
So since the early part of your career was the whole situation where as a player you were already good enough, but because of the Riot ban you couldn't play in competitive, I might have thought that maybe you'd be like, no, you know, I can't wait to play like 5 more years, you know, because I want to kind of make up for lost time. Are you someone you think will you still be playing League of Legends in 3 or 4 years? What do you think?
That was kind of the way I was thinking too, but I think being a pro is, I wouldn't say it's tough, but, you know, it takes a lot more time than you might think. Like there's a lot more to it than the outsiders think. I think you have to practice all the time, so you will experience burnouts and stuff. So I'd say it's kind of hard to tell. You know, I wanna at least win something before I stop playing, but yeah, I'd want to play for as long as I possibly can, and for as long as I'm good enough.
So if people heard some of the answers you gave earlier on, where you were like, you know, in NA solo queue, you know, I've kind of felt like, could I even improve playing these guys? In fact, I didn't even used to play mid lane that much, you know. And then later on, even though we're talking about a split where TSM won, you were like, actually, I thought, you know, maybe I'd outperformed Bjergsen earlier in the split, and maybe our team was better. I love it when people are really honest, but do you think the community ever thinks you are cocky?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Is there anything? Are you a little bit cocky? I mean, some people just are, right? Like, listen, Forgiven's cocky as fuck. I'm sure you'd even admit that.
Yeah, I would say I'm pretty cocky when it comes to the game. Yeah.
And what is that based on then?
I think
knowing you're better, thinking you're better.
Yeah, I would say it's a mix of both, and sometimes it'll end up pretty bad. Like for example, when I first played against Piglet Mid, like I had a terrible series, but the thing is, people don't see why I think that. That's because, you know, when he first swapped to mid, I had the pleasure of scrimming against him, and you know, I thought it was a joke because when I was playing against him, it was literally like I felt like I played against someone who was new at mid lane. So it's like, what is this shit? Why am I playing against this guy? Like, do we really have to scrim these guys? Can we scrim another team? So that's what happened. And then I go on stage, and obviously I'm going to have a cocky mindset going into the game because I practiced against him 2 weeks prior to that. And, you know, I have a lot of respect for him as an AD carry, and he has good mechanics, but he just didn't understand how mid lane worked at the time. So I was extremely cocky in my play, and it showed. So I'd say, yeah, I can be pretty cocky, but I try to not let it affect my play too much.
Are you someone where, like, if you have problems, if you feel like you didn't perform in a game, or you lose motivation, do you have like a set of people around you can go to? Like, do you go to your coach and ask him what you should do differently? How do you turn things around when things are at their worst?
Not really. I just try to keep to myself. I usually just keep to myself, but you know, I'd also say I'm a hard worker. Like, if I ever feel like I have a bad game, I will be really, really irritated over it, and like, you know, just try to work harder next time and fix my mistakes. So I always, you know, if I ever have a bad day or a bad game, you can expect me to like work really hard on it and make sure it doesn't happen again.
So one of the weird things I've noticed about League of Legends is that whenever I interview the people who are the most famous for being really mechanically good at the game, instead of being like, yeah, oh, I'm really good, mechanically good, and, you know, like, that's a part of the game I focus on, they all just complain all the time that, like, there's actually not that much mechanics to the game, you know, it's so hard to make yourself look better than the opponent, etc. Is it frustrating sometimes in that sense that, like, essentially, even if you did amazingly, sometimes you can lose the game? Obviously, the macro aspects entirely are about your team and how the shot calling works. Is it tough to maintain motivation individually when so many factors, yes, they involve you, but they're, like, to some extent, your fate's in other people's hands as well, right?
Yeah, for sure. Like I said before, I don't really enjoy playing mid lane much in solo queue because I feel like there's not much more I can learn or do to improve myself in that aspect of the game. So yeah, I think it's pretty frustrating because you can't really, like, even if you are the very best, sometimes you're just bound to lose. But that's just the nature of a team game, I think. But in a way, back when I was banned, like season 3, it was a lot more about like being good individually. Like, if you were really good individually, you could just carry your team. But you know, that's just how it goes with the meta. Like, it changes, like how, like, Riot changes the way XP and gold works in the game, and it just makes it harder for you to like snowball the game on your own. So it becomes a much more team-based game, which is fine, I guess. But you know, I think it would be cool if individual mechanics of play meant a lot more.
is obviously like it's very easy for people, as you see with those LCS awards, where every split they just give like whoever finished in the top 3 teams, they're like the top 3 all LCS for every position. Which, I mean, people might know that that's something that tilts me, because like the idea that like the best player has to be on one of those teams, it's not even the case. You know, it could definitely not be. But when you look, is there a player out there, if you could give me an example, a mid laner where in LCS, in NA, or maybe even in Challenger, is there someone out there who's like underrated, do you think, who's actually better than people think, or he's just not on the right team at the moment? Is there someone you can think of?
Well, I would say Rookie, but I don't think he's underrated. But I don't think he's... I don't know where he is right now, actually. But, you know, he was the player that's impressed me a lot. Other than that, I can't really think of anyone right now.
Should Jensen have won the MVP in LCS in any of these splits?
I would say maybe the one where Reignover won it. I think that was probably my best chances, but I think it was reasonable that Reignover won it because, you know, he looked like the best jungler and he was on the best team. But, you know, at the same time, I think I was just as far above as my competition as he was. But I think it's fair that he won it.
Okay. Right. At the end of the interview, do you have anyone you want to thank or someone you want to say hello to?
Nope.
Okay, well, that's the end then. Tusen tak.
Tusen tak.